Hello and welcome to another video on my Summer Thunder channel. I thought I'd just like to introduce little bits of my path here, and I thought it would be fun to do that by actually having a look at some of the books that have been good for me and that have contributed to things in various ways, or maybe are quite telling in a sense, and also with a few little artifacts and bits and pieces. So I hope you find it interesting. First off, I thought I'd like to show you this book here. It's The Moon of Gomrath. Ooh, there you go. It's The Moon of Gomrath, and it's a children's book, which I first found in the early 70s in Hammersmith Library, thanks to my sister, and it's by Alan Garner. It's a really wonderful children's book which has got pagan themes to it, about a brother and sister called Colin and Susan who go for a holiday in Cheshire on Alderley Edge, and it's about the magic that they find there and the adventures they go on. It is a children's book, but it really awoke something in me. It was really very, very special, and that was the beginning of something really for me. So that's why I would actually include that. God of the Witches by Margaret Murray. Now, this book is, well, historically it's kind of pretty much rubbish, but it's was an inspiration at its time. And the thing that I really find is important about this book is it shows just how big the God of the Witches was in the popular witchcraft revival, which is to say the Horned God. And that's something which really struck me, because it was the god that basically attracted me to witchcraft. Things seem to have changed a great deal in terms of popular witchcraft nowadays, but that was really important to me at the time, and I think that's why I would include that one. Witchcraft for Tomorrow by Doreen Valiente. This was like one of the first DIY witchcraft books that I remember coming out. It came out in about 1978, and before then you really found that most of the output it was very strongly geared towards coven witchcraft and towards initiatic witchcraft. And certainly some of the first things I read were things like What Witches Do by Stuart Farrar, which I found a real inspiration and an epiphany, but it was also out of reach for me for various reasons at the time. Now, with Witchcraft for Tomorrow, Doreen Valiente really kind of broke with that whole tradition as it was coming out, and really sort of put it out there that you could be a witch yourself if you had the sincerity, and if you wanted to actually make the effort, then you could actually become a witch on your own. So I think it was a bit of a first in that sense. I'm sure there had been books before then. There had been things like Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson as well, but this is one of the first ones that I remember, and it was by Doreen Valiente, who is sort of like often considered to be the mother of modern witchcraft. So I think very significant. Here's a little something that for a lot of people will be a bit of an oddity nowadays, but I think it's really deserves to be remembered. It's called The Purpose of Love by Richard Gardner, and Richard Gardner is a figure that's really very close to my heart. He was a tarot reader and an esotericist and a researcher who died in 1997, and I met him a few times. I went to visit him in my early 20s, and he had quite extraordinary philosophy, largely based on the elements and their links to consciousness and the way that people could actually extend their consciousness. He was very concerned with things, with something which he termed water consciousness, which was a very miraculous form of consciousness which had largely fallen fallow in our time. But his whole thesis really was that by balancing the elements within us and developing them within us, we could actually lead what were really miraculous lives compared to what we think of now as being realistic, and really transform ourselves and our world. And I certainly believe that still. And I think Richard was a real inspiration for me. He was a really different kind of voice, and not one that you hear nowadays very much at all. He didn't write to be credible or to be successful. He wrote to try and impart something which wasn't normally imparted through books. So if you can find his stuff secondhand nowadays, by all means have a look at it, because he was a very, very unique voice, and one that really changed my life, actually, during my teens and during my 20s. There we go. The Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley. Well, by Aleister Crowley, he says that it was basically a channeled work through an intelligence which he called Iris. And this is the book which brought about the new aeon for Thelemites in 1904. I had to include this because because Thelema really, again, it was one of those things that really changed my life, and it had an enormous impact on me in my 20s and formed part of who I am, really. It was an extraordinarily vital philosophy for somebody who was trying to be an individual and trying to to find their true way. Thelema, is a philosophy which is based on the idea of finding the true will, which is your true course, really, and it stems from the deepest part of your true identity. It's a very profound and beautiful philosophy, and really Crowley's work is voluminous and encyclopedic, so you'd have to spend many years just really getting into his stuff, actually, I'd say. But it's well worth it as far as I'm concerned, and it remains with me, so that's why I put that one in the collection. This is quite a fun book. This is something which I managed to find after many, many years. It's a kind of like one of those coffee table books which came out in the early to mid 70s, and it's basically witchcraft and magic, and it has lots of stuff in here, which was really fascinating and inspirational for me at the time. You find a lot of Maxine and Alexander's Coven turns up in these books a lot, and it was really all rather lovely, actually. So that's a book which I had. I think my mother stole it from me and destroyed it, like she did a lot of my books, but certainly I managed to get it back eventually. It's just a bit of a fun thing to have there from the 1970s. Dennis Wheatley, people will find this really very funny, but Dennis Wheatley was an immensely popular and successful writer when I was a teenager. You'd go to the local stationery shop and there'd be just stacks of his books on all different titles there. He was a thriller writer, but he wrote a whole series of books which basically had occult and black magic themes, which were so sort of like, really fantastic, actually. Looks very dated now, the style is all very old British Empire, really, but a quite lovely writer, in fact. And I must say that the whole lure of black magic and Satanism and everything, there was always something which was very, very attractive about the way he wrote about things, and I think there's a certain amount of spillover between different parts of the occult, and certainly in terms of the popular appeal, which led to the explosive interest in the occult. So I have to put Dennis Wheatley in there, really, because he was such an old dear, really. Now, moving on to other stuff. Let's see. Shakti-Gawain and Creative Visualization. I love this book because it's just so straightforward, and it cuts out all the mystification and all the cobwebs. But basically, it's a very user-friendly, simple system of magic, and it works beautifully, I think. It's very nicely done. It's a better guide to visualization than anything I read in any occult book or guidebook, really. Because it didn't take things for granted, and it helps people to find their own way, which is I think what you need. So I always recommend it to people, actually, but that's definitely has to be part of my list, in indicating part of my path. Dear old Allen Ginsberg. Now, this is Indian Journals, which is just one of his books, but Allen Ginsberg as a figure was an enormous inspiration to me in terms of being a gay man that I could relate to, and a gay man with interest in spirituality, and who was actually there in the counterculture. I could never relate to most of the things I thought I saw as being gay when I was a young teenager. They just didn't. It just didn't have anything to do with me, really. And I saw Allen Ginsberg, and it was like, oh, at last, something that I actually understand and that actually feels right. So Ginsberg was an enormous guide for me. He was a real, like a kind of long-distance mentor, if you like. And he really did enormous stuff for me. And very much linked, Walt Whitman, the wonderful Walt Whitman, again, an inspiration, and so he has to be in there. And really, in a sense, there's this kind of line of descent from Walt Whitman through Allen Ginsberg through to various people in the counterculture, and I think it's very much part of gay liberation, and a certain sort of gay liberation, you know. So again, Walt was there, and he's just like a fount of something that really flows through my life, and I think the life of a lot of other gay men, actually. So there you go. Sexual Magic by Ketan Shual. This was one of the first books that actually really started to validate gayness within magic, actually. It was based on a series of articles that appeared in New Isis magazine, which was a Thelemic journal, in about 1987 on the subject of magic and homosexuality. But there are other things in the book as well. They were eventually published in 1988, and this is the 2012 reedition, which has some extra material in it. It's a wonderful book. It takes the subject of sexual magic, and it really kind of like humanizes it and makes it more emotionally accessible. So I think it's a wonderful book, and it also starts to deal with the god Set in a way which is really sympathetic and accessible and good. So I'm very happy with that too. But it's a beautiful book, and I thoroughly recommend it. It's definitely a bit of a breakthrough. Blossom of Bone. This is a book which is out of print. It's by, I think it's Randy Connor, isn't it? Yep, Randy Connor. It basically looks at homoeroticism and transgenderism in various, in a spiritual context at various times throughout history. So it deals with, there's a lot of pagan material in there, and it's one of the books which really helped to put paid to the like the assertions of the more homophobic parts of paganism and esotericism in terms of the place of homosexuality and homoeroticism and transgenderism within pagan mysteries and within magic. And there was a lot of that sort of thing, a lot of that sort of negative press about homosexuality and esotericism. It was very much condemned as being essentially, well, just in the realm of black magic, and just it would ruin your karma and everything. It was just quite extraordinary. You got used to it. You got used to it if you were like reading stuff in the 1970s, that it would always be either condemned or simply ignored. And this book basically turned the tables on that. So it was a great book. And here we have The Spirit in the Flesh, and this is by Walter Williams, and it's basically a book about the about Native American traditions in terms of two-spirit peoples, which is people who are again, it could be seen as homoerotic, but it's I think it's more properly transgendered, in fact. Yeah, but you'd have to read it and see. It's a beautiful book, though, and it's one of the first books that took that I read that took gender variance and really put it in a living context, in a spiritual tradition. You get glimpses of that through it, and I think that's in that sense it was really a very healing book. And maybe one last book for me, The Bear Book. In fact, this is The Bear Book too, but the whole bear culture was very healing for me, and again, it was something of an answer in terms of the sort of gay man I was. In a sense, it's sort of really an exploration of gay nature, as I could relate to it. So that was very important to me. So I include it here, and that's why. Now, in terms of like artifacts, I don't have many artifacts that I actually use very much. I do have a ritual knife, don't use it much anymore. I have a wand, don't use it much anymore. That's how things are right now. But one thing we do use a lot is this, which is a drinking horn. And we use this in making offerings to our gods. And so that's probably the main thing we actually use. This in the bowl is what we use. We use it for making offerings. And I think that's telling in a sense, because it's about communication and relationship and mutuality, and bringing that about. So that probably says something, really. It's also, I think, in my case, it's an indication of the place that heathenry is placed in, on, the function that heathenry is placed or played in my path, because basically it's the form of offering which is used in heathenry, and it's something which I carried over into our practice as witches. And lastly, it's just an altarpiece which I made quite a while ago. Essentially, it was made back in about 2007. It's one that I painted myself, and the form of it was essentially connected with me and my husband and our life and our deities at the time as well. At the time, Freya was my main deity and my main goddess, and she's shown in the painting. And on the other side, there is a form of the horn god, who was my husband's main deity. And I painted them in the ways that I can relate to them. And the symbol of the tree with the moon in its branches is one that's been with me for some time. So I put everything into that image. And again, it's kind of telling, because it's to do with our life and our relationship to our gods. So it sort of ties things together, because our relationship, our religion is a household religion, the witches, but what we have is basically a household religion and a very personal one, and it's to do with our lives and where we see value in them and meaning in them, and our relationships to our gods. So I would put that one in there too. Anyway, that may be quite impressionistic and a little bit muddled, but I hope it gives you some idea of where I'm at as a witch in terms of what I'm following, and I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks.